Hi, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm not buying books this year. Today, I am talking about the first 2 weeks of January 2019, the books that I've read, and giving brief reviews of each one. Hopefully, I won't be talking too much about each book, just because then the review portion would end up being, 45 minutes long, and I'm not sure everybody wants to sit through that. So I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible. So why don't we just get into the books? The first one is Gail's Family by Ruby Dixon, and I talked about this a little bit in my January TBR video. The Ice Planet Barbarian series, I think, to a large extent, has sort of run its course for me. The thing that attracted me to the series to begin with was the old school romance flavor that it had. So these days, I don't think people are as attracted to storylines typically of heroes kidnapping heroines and dragging them off to the barbarian wilds to be ravished until they like it. Which is sort of the trope in a lot of old school historical romance. And as a teenager, I loved that. I ate it up with a spoon. But knowing now what I know about things like consent, those don't have the attraction to me that they used to. I still read them, but I think more aware of their limitations. The nice thing about the Ice Planet Barbarian series is that they have a lot of that same old school flavor. The trope is similar, but it's very much clearer that the women involved are enjoying themselves. So when they're dragged off against their will, it's, for one thing, they're first person. So you're in the woman's head as opposed to this third person omniscient perspective that you don't get as much of the internal monologue and feelings about the situation that they're in as you do in the Ice Planet Barbarian series. So rather than it being something that happens to them, it's something that's happening with them. And then also just the way the alien race is constructed, they are... can I say this? Yeah, I can say this. Ribbed for her pleasure. They have extra features that indicate that the race that's involved is deliberately designed to be as attractive to women sexually as possible. So that just seems a lot more modern and progressive and interesting to me. The problem is, I think that's run its course. The Ice Home series, the new series, just doesn't have that same magic. I'm not even sure the as we got into the Ice Planet Barbarian series, that those still have that kind of magic. This one in particular, I think it was very light on the romance. It was very much more about this character Gail, and less about her relationship with the man that she meets, and much more about the relationship between her and an orphaned alien child that they wind up with. And while I think those kinds of stories are wonderful and important, they're just not the kinds of stories that I'm interested in. I'm looking for a romance, and this was very much more about a family. It read to me more like science fiction, romance, women's fiction. And it just wasn't what I was looking for. So as I've said, I'm canceling Kindle Unlimited at the end of the month. Well, I mean, I've already canceled it, but I lose access to it at the end of the month. And I initially thought that I was going to be very upset about that because I have really enjoyed Ruby Dixon's books to date, but they're just not working for me the way that they used to. So that's Gail's Family. The next book is also a Kindle Unlimited book. This is The Mermaid's Curse by Alexa Rowland. It's very, very short. I think it's 99 cents outside of Kindle Unlimited now. I'm not sure it's still in KU. But it's basically the story of a merman who is banished from his undersea kingdom as a result of an inappropriate relationship with the undersea kingdom's princess. And inappropriate from the perspective that their families don't approve. It's not like it's a non-consensual relationship or anything like that. And so there's this second chance romance essentially set up between these two characters who are basically pining for each other. And I don't want to spoil it because it is really very short, but Of course, it is a romance, and of course, those are the two protagonists, so they do meet again. But what's really interesting about this, I think, were the Aquaman parallels. So we saw Aquaman, my husband and I, a few weeks ago, and right when it came out. One of the things that I was disappointed by was sort of the lack of a strong romance storyline. Now this one is short, so that might not fill every need that you had for a longer Aquaman storyline. But if you're into mermen and under the sea kingdoms and looking for something to sort of fill that continued desire, I would say The Mermaid's Curse was a good bet. The next book is To Wed His Christmas Lady, and this is by Christy Caldwell. This is another Kindle Unlimited title. I read this book after Christmas, at the beginning of January, and it's the story of a heroine who hasn't had the easiest life in terms of, in terms of the level of privilege she has. Obviously, she's an aristocrat's daughter, she's a duke's daughter. She hasn't really been wanting for anything material, but her father is particularly cold, abusive, views her sort of as a bargaining chip on the marriage mart, and that's really as much as he thinks of her at all. And so at the beginning of the book, she is attending a school away from home. It's Christmas time, and he forgets to send the carriage for her. So she's alone in school, and is forced to take a ride from another student in her carriage, a student who doesn't like her at all, which is sort of understandable because she's pretty difficult. She behaves as one might imagine a girl who really hasn't had a lot of love or affection in her life would, who is also very privileged and views other people as sort of beneath her or anyway, she is a difficult character. I really liked her. I really understood where she was coming from. And I think either you do or you don't on this one. The hero, though, is a very nice guy. He has a very loving and supportive family. He has sort of a wanderlust that he's sort of his family has agreed to let him indulge for some period of time, but then he has to come back to England and wed and carry on the family. He's a duke's heir, and as you might imagine, there's an arrangement between their two families. So in any case, the way this works out is they end up snowed in together in an inn through a series of coincidences, but that's okay. Usually, at least they're not in the same bed, but they don't share a room or anything. But they definitely are snowed in the same inn, and it's mostly just them and their servants. So it's a really interesting set of characters, and it's interesting to see how they sort of navigate their relationship without telling one another who they are. So this is also kind of a case of hidden identity. I'm not sure how to describe this one to adequately explain just how lovely it was. So I'm actually going to go ahead and read a little bit of it to you, because I think this will encapsulate what I loved about it much better than anything I could describe would. So this is from To Wed His Christmas Lady by Christy Caldwell. It's about 47% of the way into the book, so not really a spoiler. Do you know what I believe, Carmia? Kara stood immobile, as frozen as the sharp icicles hanging from the sign outside the inn. She could not so much as muster a nod. What? Her breath emerged as a breathless whisper. I believe there is more to you than you'd have people know. How could this man see so much of her when the world saw nothing more than the icy facade she presented? The part of herself that had spent years keeping people out wanted to lash out at him for his knowing. Yet for the first time in more years than she could remember, no stinging diatribe sprung from her lips. What do you see? She whispered, aching to know, and more, to be that person he took her as. I see a woman who loves to smile, but who fears doing so. With his words, he reached inside her heart and fanned that long, cold organ with a contagious warmth that spread its beautiful heat to other parts of her too chilly being. I see a woman who is very afraid of being whispered about and talked of, that she presents an empty, unlikable facade to the world. The unerringly accurate words speared her. She parted her lips in silent shock. He brushed his thumb over her lower lip. Of her own volition, her lashes fluttered, and then, drawing in a deep breath, she let him in. I think it's sort of an interesting, it just seems like a common experience for a lot of people who have in one way or another ended up misunderstood in their lives. And I think this is one of the things that I love best about romance, is the idea of two people seeing each other. And maybe being seen for the first time, really being understood at a level that I think most of us, some of us, maybe could only dream of. I think, if you're in a relationship, married, if that's something that's important to you, you may have found that. But I do think it's sort of one of the fun things about romance, that that's something that you get to live and relive whenever you read it in a book. So that's what I love about To Wed His Christmas Lady. The next book is The Spring Bride by Gracie. I read this one in audio. It was in the Audible Romance package. I have enjoyed this author in the past. She writes Regency historicals. The Meridew Sisters, I think, was the series that I read and really enjoyed. This is part of the Chance Sisters series. And I think in general this series is slightly less successful. The premise is that two sisters and two other girls end up masquerading as their sisters because they were in an awkward situation and are basically adopted by sort of an aristocratic woman. Some of them have aristocratic backgrounds and some of them don't. This third book is the younger of the two actual sisters. And the reason that this one didn't work for me is that the hero, the white aristocratic hero, poses as a member of a racial ethnicity that he is not throughout most of the book. And it constantly uses what many people would consider to be a racial slur that I'm not going to repeat on camera. I don't need to go there. But sort of that masquerading thing that still sometimes happens in historical romance, it's just not something that works for me. And I was feeling like this book really needed to stop. I needed to stop listening to it. I tried to sort of press on in the hopes that this would be sort of a brief thing that we would get over and that eventually we would move on with the plot. That didn't happen. And then there comes a point where there's a ball, and the heroine of the second book, she had been the daughter of missionaries and had been in China for some period of time. Well, for the ball, she and her new husband decide to dress up like Chinese people. That's different than being a missionary in China. And that was just the point where I had to stop. Okay, so the next book is The Counterfeit Betrothal by April Kihlstrom. I read it in paperback. That's this one here. It was published in 1987 and then republished, I don't know when, but in ebook. So it is still available if you don't want to deal with the paperback thing. I'll put the cover up here. And then I'll make it go away because it's really quite something else. This book, I think, is somewhat indicative of its period. There are some things in it that modern readers are probably going to side-eye. The hero has a tendency to sometimes try to impose his will in ways that I think a modern romance reader would look at and say, no, I don't think so. Things like there's a punishing kiss. There's times when he imposes her will on her and she's kind of saying no, and it never reaches any kind of sexual conclusion. This is a completely, it's a chaste book. Let's call it that. So they, as far as like a modern romance, there are things in it that I think we would look at and say, we don't want to do that anymore. But as a book from its time, it would have been odd for that not to be the case. So there definitely are sort of new tropes like enthusiastic consent that we expect. That would not have been the case in 87. So I think as a book from its period, it's really quite brilliant. the premise of the book is that the hero and heroine get engaged because their parents want them to be engaged. It's a little bit of an arranged marriage. They do both agree to it. It's completely, there's no pressure or really, it's maybe more pressure from the hero's father on the hero than the heroine's father on the heroine. But either way, they're on board. And then things start to fall apart because it is called the Counterfeit Betrothal, so I assumed it was going to be a fake engagement situation, and it is. They find out things about marriage and about each other that make them think, oh, well, maybe this isn't going to work, maybe we should plan on breaking up at some later date. And then they end up falling in love, but still feeling like it's a fake relationship. They get their friends involved, they get their family involved in trying to hook each other up with other people. It's very, on Twitter, I called it Shakespearean, and it really is. The level of complication that they introduce into this simple fake engagement in terms of being together or not being together and hooking up their friends with each other, and it's really very delightful. It's intricately arranged in a way that was just absolutely delightful. So if you can handle a punishing kiss here and there, I highly recommend this book. The next book is Damaged Goods by Ainsley Payton. I had read the previous book in this series, Offensive Behavior, several years ago, so this one's been on my Kindle Unlimited queue for a while. It's a contemporary. It's based, I think, in the San Francisco Bay Area, although the setting is not a tremendous component to that story. The hero has been in an accident, and the heroine had been in another sort of different kind of accident that resulted in a similar injury in the past. And so, as the hero is trying to recover from this, and his friends are concerned about him and how he's handling the injury, and then also his painkillers, the pain-killing medication that he's taking. They sort of bring her in to talk to him. And their relationship kind of goes from there. The reason that I liked this book was that they do spend quite a bit of time, I mean, I don't mean to say, and they don't spend quite a bit of on-page time apart, but they do, there is a sense of time passing. And there's a sense of growth through rehab and therapy and a lot of things that I think romances that are based around trauma have a tendency to overlook. And there are a lot of romances like this. I mean, there are a lot of romances where someone has an addiction or a mental health issue or, you know, some other life challenge where, you know, the love of the other person makes it all okay. And there's really no sense in this book that that's true. I think there is a sense of, on both of their parts, that they are going to need to continue to learn and grow. It's just that they've kind of agreed to learn and grow together. And they do a lot of work over the course of the book. So I think that's what really made this one work for me. I think there are a number of content warnings on it. There's a car accident, and there's addiction, and there's spinal injuries and family abuse. I mean, it's not a lighthearted book. So definitely, if you're interested in this one, take care and take a look at your content warnings. The next book is Strictly Off Limits by Jessica Hawkins. I was sort of between major audiobooks. I was looking for something kind of light after The Spring Bride, which didn't work for me. And so I saw this was in the Audible Romance package, and I decided to try it out. It was only 2 hours. This did not work for me at all. And a lot of it is because the premise of the story is a teenage girl. She's, I think, 18. And working for a friend of her father's over spring break so that she can make a purchase that she'd like to make. And he is, I think, 50. Now, I enjoy age gap romances. The bare fact of the age gap would not be enough for me to say, oh, no, time out, let's not go there. I do think, though, that when you are dealing with a situation like a large age gap, and then it also being basically an office situation, an office romance where he is her boss, that becomes, there are lines for me that have to be walked. And I think the biggest one that I have identified in the past that makes these kinds of stories work for me is when the person with less power is the one initiating the relationship, whether it be romantic or sexual. And that was not the case here. Not at all. The hero is definitely the aggressor. There's a kink element to it that is not negotiated at all. That sort of sprung on her without any kind of discussion about whether that's something she likes or can accept. And then at the end, of course, you know, they've got this huge age gap, and the hero is the heroine's father's friend, and that's sort of pushed off as, oh, well, if they don't like it, too bad. And I think that that's not entirely realistic. I think even people, I mean, unless you're completely estranged from your family, which, you know, some people are, and that's fine. That was not the case in this book. And I think I would have liked to have seen more in the way of some sort of rapprochement between her and her family and him, to get the sense that this was really going to work as a happily ever after. So, I mean, if this is something that you can enjoy at the level of, say, erotica, then perhaps, I mean, it was quite sexy, I guess. But as a romance, it really didn't work for me at all. The next book was what I downloaded after that. So this is another audio. It's Be Not Afraid by Alyssa Cole. This was much better. In fact, this was like the highlight of my first 2 weeks of audio listening. This book is set in the Revolutionary War. The heroine has escaped enslavement and is working for the British. So she's defecting to the British because she's been offered her freedom. The hero is fighting for the colonists. And there's a lot of very interesting interaction between the two of them over the relative merits of one perspective on this versus another, and them trying to navigate freedom in this war that was about freedom, but freedom mostly for white people. And so it's an aspect of history that I think that gets neglected in history books. I certainly wouldn't have thought, as a child, I don't think we were taught that, you know, anyone black ever fought for the colonists. It was all Paul Revere and, you know, whatever. Anyway, and so I think the storyline was interesting, and then also the romance was particularly good. There were some things that had happened in both of their pasts, mainly the heroines, that prevented their immediate sort of running away together. But ultimately, I think it was very successful in terms of, in a very short book. I don't know how long it is, but it didn't take me very long to listen to it. It would be that successful in terms of developing their characters, developing the romantic conflict, developing the overarching sort of historical setting. It was a really, really terrific book. Okay, so now we're down to the last book. Yay! This is probably so long. And that's The Caveman Alien's Trap by Callista Sky. This book is not at all what the back cover copy seems to imply that it is. So, the heroine has crash landed on Earth. She's an Earthling, again, kidnapped by another race of aliens that, you know, dropped her on this planet. And in the previous 4 books, I think, of this series, 4 books? Yeah. The heroes and heroines have all sort of gone off together, where the heroine sort of gets separated from the group and meets this caveman from another tribe. And they are more interesting than a lot of books of this type, I think is the best way to put it. In this particular one, the heroine is able to explain a bunch of things to the guy that he would not necessarily have figured out on his own. For example, he's an artist. He is trying to accomplish another type of sort of building engineering goal. And she's able to offer suggestions that he then sort of takes on wholeheartedly and thinks she's wonderful for it. Which is sort of fun because that's not always the reaction that a guy has to being told by a woman that there's a better way to do something. So from that perspective, it seemed rather feminist to me. I think this was fine. I think it's not a brilliant book. I don't think it was a terrible book. It didn't upset me in any way. But it's like a lot of these Kindle Unlimited books that I've read, I think, that unless I couldn't have told you most of the plots of the previous 4 books. And this is one of the reasons why I'm glad I'm giving up Kindle Unlimited. I have a tendency to, rather than carefully choose and savor these books, I have a tendency to churn through them. I get a particular desire, sometimes it's shifters or cyborgs or aliens or whatever it happens to be. I go through a ton of books. I don't remember what any of them are about, and to some degree I feel like I waste a lot of time with them. I don't have infinite amounts of time. As I've said before, last year I read about 200 books. This year I anticipate reading about 200 books. Maybe more, I don't know. I've read 9 already so far this year. It's only the 13th. So, looking at the books that I have, the books on my shelf, the books on my Kindle, there are a number of books that I was really looking forward to, that I really, really, really would love to read by authors that I adore. I have another Alyssa Cole book. In my last video, I talked about one of her books that's coming out this year, and I haven't read the second book in that series, and the third book is coming out this year. I have a number of Beverly Jenkins titles on my TBR that I haven't read. I think there are books that will stick with me, that I will remember and will add something to my life, that will actually enrich my life in a way that I'm not sure books like The Caveman Aliens Trap do. I think they can. I don't mean to paint every book like this with that brush, or every book in Kindle Unlimited with that brush, because frankly, I've read a lot of great things in Kindle Unlimited, but I think the publishing model of that subscription does encourage people to consume rather than savor. So this has been interesting from that perspective, that I feel like I'm trying to get through these Kindle Unlimited books and before I lose the subscription on the 26th. And I think I'm feeling better about that now, about canceling that now, than I was at the beginning of this project. Just from the perspective of seeing if I'm able to really more savor things that I was really looking forward to, rather than going with sort of the impulse of the moment on wanting to, I don't know, just mindlessly distract myself with aliens. Sorry, I wandered off a little bit there. But those are the 9 books that I've read so far at the beginning of 2019. I think it's a mixed bag, of course, I think as it's always going to be. I hope these were interesting. I hope these reviews were helpful. If there are things that you guys want to know about books that I'm not sort of saying, if you'd like me to read the back cover copy. This is the first time I've ever really done a video review, so I'm not sure how helpful or not these things were. I hope they were interesting, and have a good week. Doubt not, slay some words, and Lex has your back. Bye.